The Martian Trilogy, John P. Moore, Amazing Stories, Black Science Fiction, and the Illustrated Feature section. Starring K. Cerise Wright, Brooks Hefner, Dedrin Sneed, Val Barnhart, Killian Vetter, Edward Austin Hall, Max Mateer, Lisa Yazik, and your host from Amazing Stories, Steve Davidson.
This is the second online meeting of the contributors to the Martian Trilogy, John P. Moore, Amazing Stories, Black Science Fiction, and the Illustrated Feature section, which was recently published by Amazing Selects and features a resurrected, near 100-year-old set of stories that are the first space opera tales written by a Black author. First thing I'll do is ask everybody to introduce themselves and give a brief accounting of their background. And we'll go with Cerise first because she was not at the original meeting.
Hi, I'm Case Cerise Wright. I'm a Locus Award-winning science fiction author who has written numerous short stories, poems, articles, and co-wrote a novella. I received a master's in writing popular fiction from Seton Hill University, and my novel was my thesis for the program. I consider myself an Afrofuturist writer.
Okay. Val?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Val Barnhart. I recently graduated from Georgia Tech, the Ivan Allen College major of literature, media, and communication. It's a really fancy way to say that I got to spend a major studying science fiction, and I really enjoyed it. And I also did some technical stuff on the side. For this project, I contributed writing the biography about John P. Moore. I helped edit some of the story text, and then I helped do some of the background research on just kind of like the time period and what was going on with evolutions and like Black history and Black technology at the time. And yeah, that's me.
Okay. Killian?
Hello, I'm Killian. I graduated from Georgia Tech last year, or earlier this year, really, with a major in computer science and math. But really what I did was I worked with Lisa on this project, helping to recover the first Black space opera. And I really focused on George Schuyler, who began editing the insert that it was published in. And now I'm at UC Davis studying English literature.
Okay. Max?
Hi everyone, I'm Max. I am an upcoming graduate this December from Georgia Tech. I am a nuclear engineering major with a science fiction minor, which is how I got involved in the lab. And I contributed to the book through historical contextualization of the era and the works that were going on, as well as bios about some of the editors that were involved in the process.
Ed?
I'm Ed Hall. I'm a game developer. I co-created the Hunter the Reckoning back in 1999. This is the most recent edition of the game. I'm also a poet. This is my first chapbook. Eight crayon poems. Yes, poems is spelled correctly. Fruit of the poetry. And I'm the co-editor of Mothership Tales from Afrofuturism and Beyond.
And Lisa? Microphone.
Hi, everyone, and now you can hear me. I'm Lisa Yezik. I'm a Regents Professor of Science Fiction Studies at Georgia Tech, and I do a lot of work on the recovery of lost voices in science fiction and the discovery of new voices. And so it was my science fiction lab was where students started looking for the history of commercially oriented Black genre fiction. And thanks to the help of at least one person who is also here today in the chat with us, we were able to recover about 3 dozen stories the first semester when we were started looking, and this story, the John Moore story, was one of those.
Okay. And I'm Steve Davidson, publisher of Amazing Stories and Amazing Selects, which is our book imprint. And when Lisa mentioned these stories from 1930 and identified them as space opera, I immediately recognized that it filled in a gap of what was generally thought to be the history of Black science fiction. And I felt that it was very important to make it available as widely as possible, and suggested to Lisa that we bring out a book, and the result is what we're talking about here today. This is our second meeting. We have some members who were at the first one, and I
Steve,
don't.
we've got one person here yet who hasn't introduced himself too.
Oh, I do. Did I miss? Who did I miss?
Yeah, Brooks joined us a minute or two late.
Oh, he's not showing up on my. There he is. Well, Brooks, why don't you make yourself known and introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, sorry for running in a little late. I'm struggling with time these days. So my name's Brooks Hefner. I'm professor of English at James Madison University. And I was invited to contribute a piece to this volume because I published a book titled Black Pulp in 2021, which was a result of probably 5 years of research on commercial genre fiction published in African American newspapers in mostly the 20s, 30s, and 40s, kind of looking at what Black writers and readers were sort of, meeting around, what sort of ideas and themes, right? The way that Black writers and readers were transforming different kinds of genre fiction. I kind of started into this project with an interest in initially with an interest in George Schuyler, and then when I began kind of looking into the newspapers themselves, realized that there was this much bigger archive of genre fiction. Among the things that I ran into there was, in fact, John Moore's space opera pieces. And so I was really thrilled when I learned that Lisa and her team at Georgia Tech were putting together an edition of this, because that was part of the whole purpose for me of doing that book, was to try to elevate those voices and create pathways for people, to find this really amazing work.
Thanks. And thanks for your contribution. So what I had started to say earlier was that we've got a mixed crew this evening. Some people who were at the first meeting where we basically discussed everybody's feeling about the book, a little bit about their contribution and background, and how they fit into having put this whole thing together. And I don't really want to go and recover the same ground this time around. In an email discussion during the past week, one of the things that has also come up is some discussion about Moore's identity, which I'd like to get to in a little bit. But we do have a few people here whose contribution to the book was not discussed in our first meeting. So I'd like to give them an opportunity to discuss what they feel the impact of these stories are, this recovery is, and what making this content available to a wider audience these days involves. And Brooks, I think, since it kind of segues a little bit from your initial introduction of yourself, why don't you tackle that?
Sure. So, I mean, I think this is a really fabulously important book. And like I said, I'm thrilled that this work has come out. And I think for me, what was so important in my own research for Black Pulp was trying to think about the ways in which, let me see if I can put this in really clear terms. If we look at the like the history of science fiction itself, right? Especially the early science fiction of the 20s and 30s, there's great work there, but there's also a lot of troubling representations of non-white figures. There's also a lot of kind of really troubling metaphors around race as well that get kind of circulated. And this is not to say this is true of all science fiction of the period, but it's definitely a dominant theme. At the same time, when we look at African American literature from the period, oh, absolutely, David Keller's The Menace is, for sure. But when we look at, African American literature from that period, what's really striking is that the kind of African American literature that we tend to teach as part of an American literary tradition was often literature that the writers themselves even explicitly said was for a white readership, right? So a lot of African American literature of the 1920s, even the Harlem Renaissance, was targeted at a white audience that needed to be taught things about racial injustice. And I'm not trying to say anything bad about this. I think this is an incredibly valuable dimension of African American literary production. And what kind of was really behind the work and the research that I was doing is, as I wanted to sort of pull back the curtain a little bit to think about, well, in a moment when Black literacy was increasing exponentially, right? And print culture was increasing exponentially. What were Black readers looking for when they were looking, for entertainment? And was sort of the premise that I started from, was in an attempt to sort of think about what popular literature that wasn't, riddled with things like David Keller's The Menace, right? These kind of versions of white supremacist talking points, like what that kind of popular fiction might look like. And it wasn't in the magazines at the time, not really. There were some popular Black magazines, but not as many with a substantial Black readership. But it was the weekly African American newspapers that contained this treasure trove of Black genre fiction, starting largely with the illustrated feature section, where John Moore's amazing stories were published, right, where the Martian Trilogy was published. And so that for me was just a kind of, it honestly blew my mind when I started digging into the digital archives of the newspapers to realize just how much was there. Thousands of stories and serial installments covering all genres. And so when I was trying to put together my own academic book on this, I was really thinking about how to think about each genre individually, what the history of that genre happened to be, and then how these writers, many of whom were sort of amateur or semi-professional writers, were really making sophisticated kind of transformations of the raw material of the genre and then giving us another version. So Moore's work, for example, taking the space opera, which is often about these kind of heroic white scientists encountering, some other race of beings on a different planet that is definitely, their skin is definitely a different color, and there's like some kind of contest here, right? But instead, what we have with John Moore is depictions of Black excellence, right? Black scientists become the protagonists in this story. And the ways in which some of these transformations resonate with the concerns of the readers of the time was just it was just, I mean, it was humbling, honestly, to encounter the kind of joy, the excitement. I just felt really humbled to encounter it, and was excited to be able to write about it and to sort of elevate a lot of these writers whose names have been essentially lost to had been essentially lost to the literary record. So that's kind of where I come in, on this question and this project, and I'm really just thrilled that Lisa asked me to chime in with a little piece just about the archival research.
Well, thank you. Val, why don't you tell us a little bit about your contributions and how you feel about the place of this particular book?
Yeah, absolutely. So this project, when it was first proposed, and we talked about it initially as like Octavia's ancestors. So, we knew there were Black authors publishing before Octavia Butler. We didn't know where. And, our lab is, massive Butler fans. So tracing that back was really interesting from that perspective. And then it took on its own personality as we went through these archives. And, there's something so special about looking at these like snapshots of history, especially because, as Dr. Yazek, talks about in a lot of her, lectures and a lot of the introductory science fiction things that I was taught. It's interesting how science fiction is in such a dialogue with what's happening in the world at the time. Obviously, it's very visionary and it looks to the future, but it has a lot of dialogue with what's going on at the present. So all very interesting things to look at in the archives. But especially with this story, it's such a striking piece. It's such a very like bold story. It has all of this dimension to it, and it practically like pops out of the page. And even from a standpoint of just going over the text, like when I was, running over the edits with you, what I nerd out about a lot with Moore's writing is his writing very much is in this style that is meant to evoke this like orative performance. There's a lot of usage of these like really, really long ellipses. You'll see like 8 or 9 periods, and it's this really dramatic, drawn out pause. And I think it can be kind of off-putting for some readers who are not used to seeing things in that kind of non-traditional presentation. But once you read something like that out loud and you input those pauses and you really bring the story off of the page and give it that added dimension, I think it makes it come to life even more. And so even just from the standpoint of like nerding out about this guy's grammar, right? It is interesting how it evolves into this discussion of like elevated storytelling and these added dimensions. And we think back to oral traditions across like the story of, the history of humankind and like how stories used to be told. It's this really beautiful marriage of traditions across time with these like visions of the future that I just, even from the first time I read it and really started looking at that kind of stuff, just was fascinated with.
Thanks. I think I'm gonna, excuse me, I think I'm gonna copy some of that from the transcript and quote you. Killian?
Yeah, so the thing that really gets me excited about my contribution to this project and this project as a whole is so much of it is about the affordances of genre fiction and popular fiction and what it can do for the readers and the writers, because so much of Skylar's editorship was really a kind of reaction to the Harlem Renaissance kind of view um of the top, oh good, I can't remember the phrase, but so much of the view of like the best of the black community will kind of lead them into the future, while Skylar took a view that was much more about integration and the talented 10th. Thank you, Lisa. Um, and while Skylar took a view where he's like, I want to produce culture for the masses, and because that's what is happening all throughout society for all races. They have their mass media culture, and like that is what is really the backbone. And he does this by creating these very strict rules about like making everything printed in the illustrated feature section very readable, making it clear black and white morality, um, kind of outlawing certain kinds of like uh, like racial language and things like that. And he does that for the purpose of making this mass media culture, and it creates a very different type of commentary on what race does in society by just having these multiracial cultures exist without much commentary on it, other than like, yeah, this is a world where the all the best scientists are black, and now we're going to space, and there's no need for that further justification or anything like that. It can just be, this is the world we live in, and black people are great. Now we can explore the universe.
Excellent. Excellent. I got a little message here from Val, but I can't. More shout out. Could you, Val, could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I was just tagging on to what Killian said. In the story text, they talk about how, it's there's like a talented black scientist and a talented black doctor, but there's also an author there. Like I believe our protagonist is the one who's like, yeah, I'm this published author, I put out all these amazing novels, and now I'm going to go on, like, live this adventure. So it is just kind of an interesting and kind of sweet nod to like more his own talents and also his fellow authors of the time. I just really enjoy it.
Okay. Lisa, I lost track. What you're saying, I've lost track of what that
Oh,
is in reference to.
Oh, I was thinking along the same lines as Val, right? That not only do we have the most talented black scientists in the world in this story, but they specifically kidnap the most talented black science fiction author in their world, because obviously no one's going to believe them about going to Mars unless you take a science fiction author with you to document it, because as one does, right? I mean, which
Yeah.
is, yeah, fantastic. And it's cool, right? Because you see that a little bit in some of the white authored stories at that time, where you get that meta moment, especially in women's science fiction, interestingly. So I think it's nice to see this here as well. And it's also such a lovely FU to Edgar Rice Burroughs, right? Is it just completely takes back the John Carter series.
Yeah. Well, what you had said during our first meeting was that everybody was imitating Burroughs, and it got a round of applause, I think, from us. Cyrus, do you want to try your hand at that, discussing your contribution?
I looked at it from the side of the female character development. And Val, I'm an editor, so when I read the story, I had to put aside my editor side, just forget the grammar. But yeah, so it's a typical, pulp story, male dominated, daring do acts, and the prize is the woman. So there's not much character development for the females in Moore's story. So I compared it with earlier and contemporary Black female writers, notably Phyllis Wheatley, who wrote a poem in the 1700s about imagination and taking it to outer space and seeing the whole of the Earth from there and going to different planets. And that sort of presaged the increase in technology and the role Black scientists have in it. And the role of Black scientists has been suppressed over the years. And as I've gotten older, I've learned about, George Washington Carver, and I can't remember the doctor who invented steroids, and you're just now finding out about all of these things personally on Facebook, where people are doing little historical vignettes. And so it's fascinating. And in seeing these things, you have to go back and reread and restudy in order to find out the entire breadth of the contribution of Black scientists in the United States, but particularly for, this anthology that I contributed to. I also looked at Pauline Hopkins' Of One Blood, and her characters. That was Aunt Hannah and Candace, the Ethiopian queen, and Dianthe, who was the wife slash girlfriend of the protagonist. And it was just comparing the female character development between these authors. And I would expect that a woman author would pay more attention to female character development. And we also harken back to the effects of slavery, which Moore was not allowed to do because he was given the strictures of not referring to anything gloomy, to make it interesting, But on the whole, I think just the discovery of an illustrated feature section was great, and then to find out that they serialized an Afrofuturistic science fiction story was phenomenal. And I'm thinking, what effect would that have had on me? I've been watching Star Trek since I was 3, but I didn't come across many Black characters in written science fiction. I think the first time was in Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles, where Black people were leaving the South, and even then, they didn't speak and they didn't drive the narrative. So, what if this had been widely available in libraries or serialized on television or even made a movie? It would have had a great impact, I think. But I'll let someone else speak.
Okay, thank you. Dedrin, you just joined us. So could you introduce yourself? And one of our topics is your opinion of what the place of this book in the greater scheme of things is.
Thank you. I appreciate you so very much, and good afternoon and evening, everyone. My name is Dejan Sneed here, based out of Atlanta, Georgia, founder of Subsume, the Subsume Studios. I get to be a Southern meander and art tech culture around the world, really looking at the space of Afrofuturism as a design tool and also civic and cultural accelerator. And so, particularly for this book and this project, I think as we're just coming into I think the reality of being able to enjoy this piece and really just have it ruminate in a space of, I'll use the word validation to start, but I think it really is more of an affirmation, if not a confirmation of that the space of science fiction really is a space of humanity, no matter what other points of technology or travel or imagination that come. I think what we are is just imagining a new and intimate way to really connect with each other. And so seeing this space, seeing these stories, these serialized stories, being able to be enjoyed by a large population, but given the state of the world, particularly the state of America at that point in time, I think it just really spoke to a resilience to just imagine that there was a world by which they had that agency and had that authority to travel not only beyond the stars, but to have a space of brilliance. So this project was amazing, and I think the narratives and points that I've been able to read, not only from the quality folks that here are gathered, but I think this book is really going to be a hallmark in just general science fiction, and I think in fictional studies. So I'm just privileged to be a part and to take this, and really I just feel very empowered to just continue to write great science fiction in my own spaces. Thank you.
Well, thank you. One of the things that came up early on, I guess, during the research into these stories and the backgrounding and whatnot, was the fact that we could find little to nothing about John P. Moore. So that's a bit problematic. The book has biographies of various individuals involved in the illustrated feature section, and it would have been nice to have a full biography of the author of these stories. And there's some speculation that it may have been a pseudonym. This past week, in just looking to see how the book was doing around the web and whatnot, I came across a mention of a gun importer and manufacturer from the late 1800s through the early 1900s named John P. Moore's and Sons. I posed the question to Lisa about whether this might have been the inspiration for a pseudonym, because that company was in New York. But I've done some research and very minor level of research into it, but at this point in time, I don't see any connection between that particular company and Black society of that era, or even providing guns to Negro units of the U.S. Army, et cetera, et cetera. So, Lisa, I was going to turn it over to you anyhow.
Yeah, I mean, this was so interesting when this came up this week, because I'm also editing another book for MIT Press. I had mentioned this in the last discussion on radium age Afrofuturism. So Black authored future-oriented science fiction from about 1930 to 1938. And one of the things that I was really thinking about as I've been looking through and doing the history here is this shift you see, especially in the 1920s, towards an increasing number of Black leaders not necessarily advocating violent revolution, but definitely beginning to advocate for Black people owning weapons and fighting back against violence with violence. And you need to remember that in much of America, it was actually illegal for African Americans, right, to own weapons from the 1700s until basically the Civil Rights Movement, right? So you have this moment, right, where the Klan is on the rise and there's a lot of white on Black violence, and yet Black people are somehow not allowed legally to defend themselves. And by the 20s, both Du Bois and Marcus Garvey, who had been very pro-peace before this, in very different ways, right, through either integration or separation. But by the 20s, they're both advocating at least for the right of Black people to own arms and to defend themselves. And so it seemed interesting as we were talking about this, as someone had noted, that our great heroes, Earth is all awesome and peaceful and integrated, but oh, we go to Mars and look at this. We have not one, but two great, fully armed Black civilizations, right? And that seems very interesting. And then just once you bring up that there's this John P. Moore weapons person, it's evocative, if nothing else. Val, you did a lot of work on searching for John P. Moore. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. I will say John P. Moore, in whatever state he was and whatever name that man had, he was the most elusive figure I've ever done research into. And I've always kind of prided myself in being really good at like looking into rabbit holes. So I was like, oh, fine. I'm digging through obituaries and birth records and all this, and I could not find this man. But it was interesting, the figures that we did find and the work that we did with a couple different archivists. Like we came across, I have my biography pulled up here just because I had to remember the exact dates. There was an article in 1933 about a newly licensed Dr. John P. Moore. There was also an article later that same year in March about a John P. Moore that was writing like a very scandalous play. So like, and that's something that I addressed in the book is like, who was John P. Moore? He could have been all of these men. He could have been one man doing all of these things. You know, either way, it's incredible that we had all of this like Black talent concentrated in that area that was being reported on at the time. Like, it's incredible. But in discussion of the pseudonym, I was like, that absolutely makes sense. And I know that was the theory we had floated for a little while, just because, you know, if you have this guy who might be writing these really scandalous plays or putting out, you know, science fiction, these like more pulpy stories, you know, it could be considered, you know, there could be some kind of not conflict, but like contrast in how you're presenting across different kind of groups of society, right? And so I think that the weapons manufacturer angle is definitely interesting as a possibility. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it makes complete sense. It definitely could be an inspiration. And like we were talking about with these two armed, like, you know, excellent fighting societies, I think it's a really interesting kind of thing to consider. And I see Ed has his hand raised, so I will step off.
Ed?
I mentioned last time and it turns out the fellow I was talking about was not postmaster of all of Atlanta. There was a postmaster for South Atlanta. He was a Black man. His name was Luther Judson Price. And here's a picture of him. And he pertains to the conversation this time round because his kind of ambiguous appearance made it possible for him to buy arms and ammo. And that ability kept the Black people living on his street, Gammon Street, from being victims of the Atlanta race massacre in 1906. So I'm glad I was able to name check him this time around. I've been to the house where he and his family live. It's the subject. If you look it up, it occupies a number of episodes of This Old House on PBS because they helped restore the place, and it's a really interesting job. And the people who live there now, kind of a communal house, they devote a whole wall to uh, that the postmaster and his people.
Anyone else want to comment?
This got my little history gears turning. So, you know, I'm thinking about if say we run with this idea of Moore's name, his pseudonym being in reference to this gun manufacturer provider. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but in the time that the Martian Trilogy is published, we're operating in the 1920s. So we're coming from a context that is immediately not only in the midst of an important rise of the Ku Klux Klan, but also we're coming back from World War One, which gets into the concept of the Red Summer for anyone who's familiar with that. Effectively, for anyone watching this at home who isn't familiar, effectively when soldiers were returning from World War One, there was a lot of fear in white society about the sort of empowerment that a lot of black civilians were feeling having just fought for their country. Um, and consequently, a lot of racially motivated violence from mobs happened in the summer of 1919. This is contextualized by the fact that W.E.B. Du Bois encouraged black soldiers coming home from the war to not return from fighting, but return to fighting. That's a very like important quote from him there, where there's a lot of things about, hey, now that you've gone and done this, now come back into society and continue that same passion and fight in order to be treated as equals here in the country. So it points this to a direction of if Moore is choosing this name consciously based on this idea of bearing arms as a black civilian. It almost points to assuming the Martian Trilogy is where he debuts this name. This also promotes the idea of if he debuted other stories earlier and if that has connections to it. But at least insofar as a connection to the Martian Trilogy, almost as a point of look where we get if we return to fighting now rather than from fighting. Look at the futuristic look at the great future that exists if we take these steps when we begin to go through this. As in this is the end goal of the new perspective that we're operating from.
I know from my own experience that sometimes a pseudonym is chosen to make a particular point, but sometimes it's also chosen just because it appeals and you decide that you want or need to use a pseudonym. And the background that I have learned, and Val, I'll call on you right after, on the gun company was that they were an importer and manufacturer. They frequently brought stuff in from Europe and I guess finished it to varying degrees, including a fair amount of decoration. And their signage and their packaging and their guns are apparently very popular amongst collectors these days, which suggests to me that whoever Moore was, if it is a pseudonym, could very well have been aware of that name through local advertising or discussion amongst people who were buying guns or selling guns or et cetera, et cetera. So, Val?
Yeah, kind of adding on to your point there about like the multifaceted nature of pseudonyms, which I think could probably be an entire thesis topic. Anyone looking to be a PhD student, there you go. I've just handed you a gift. But I think it is interesting kind of marrying these ideas because when I was looking into that name, there was also a pretty prominent politician at the time in the Maryland area, also named John P. Moore, who's a white politician. And I think with all of the ideas that Moore brings into this story, right, especially with promoting Black science and culture and showing these advanced Black races and kind of, piggybacking off of what Max was saying, right? Showing what could be and the possibilities of like what we can achieve. I think that, you can really say it's probably like all of these things, right? This name served him many purposes. And I think it's just really fascinating seeing how even the name he presented had this like layer of intentionality to it, because I think it is very likely that he's calling on all these things to make this name for himself, and also there was probably an added layer of having this name, having this pseudonym might have guarded his identity if he was involved in other pursuits, and also he's calling to these cultural aspects, and so I think really what we're pulling away from this is like the pseudonym of John P. Moore. However he did, I guess it almost, I'm almost pulling the same point I did with the biography where it's like wherever it came from, it's magnificent, right? We see all these possible influences and whatever combination of things he was pulling from, I think it just also speaks to the genius of this man who wrote this story.
Agreed. Well, we've got about 12 minutes left. And we haven't heard much from, a little bit from Cerise, but not much from Dedrin and Austin and Brooks. So I was wondering if any of you had a point or an observation about the book that we haven't really touched on. And if any of you do, then please just raise a hand and I'll call on you. And if you don't, I'll ramble on aimlessly. No hands raised. Well, okay, Lisa, save me, please.
I actually had a question for other people. Well, an observation and a question. So one thing we know about Moore is we also know he wrote a bunch of action adventure stories. and did some reporting under that name as well. And everything was very consistent. Most of his stories were true crime stories or action adventure stories, which I think completely makes sense of the pacing. Because, like, part one of that whole story, you're like, why are we running around like Pittsburgh for so long? I don't get it here. But once you realize he was usually writing true crime stuff, it all makes more sense, right? But he also did journalism where he was covering the exploits of Black adventurers. So he covered like the first Black guy to go to Antarctica, I believe, or the North Pole. I can't remember which one it was. But I don't know what this says, but he was obviously in that sort of manly man kind of mode of popular writing. So I just sort of share that, and maybe that articulates nicely with the gun thing. But more importantly, like, I don't know, for all of you, I have another question Cerise was really clear, and I'm with you, Cerise, about the problematic depiction. I mean, I love that the love interest is Josephine Baker in space. I think that's amazing, but it does seem to have a limit. And we've been talking a lot about the great things, and I'm wondering if there are other parts that people struggled with, like the way some of us struggled with sort of the gender politics. Everything else is so promising.
Can we
You know?
put a pause on responding to that and give, who was it? Oh, Brooks, you had your hand up, please.
Yeah, I was just gonna sympathize with Val. When I was working on my research, trying to track down information of any kind on these writers was beyond frustrating. And more, I spent a little time talking about that text in my book, but not a ton of time. I was focused on longer serials for the most part, and another science fiction serial that pops up that very much falls in line with what Lisa was talking about as the kind of more militant vision of science fiction was William Thomas Smith's The Blackstockings, which was serialized in 1937. Another like Afrofuturist, like near future science fiction story that when I read it in, I don't know, 2016, was very ominous in its depiction of the rise of a fascist presidential candidate in the United States. And so, but that one, I think, that was someone with the name William Thomas Smith. Talk about trying to track down anything about this person was, and I ultimately lucked out and did, but it was also someone who went by Will Thomas, Billy Smith, like there were lots of different ways that person's name came up. And it was difficult from any really standpoint to figure out how to even begin some of that. And so I just wanted to say, I sympathize with you. And the other thing about pseudonyms, of course, is, one of the sort of chestnuts about writing for the pulps was that, we simply don't know how many Black writers published in the pulps because so many people published under pseudonyms.
Yeah.
So there may in fact be far more than we know publishing in the pulps, regardless of genre. And William Thomas Smith is an example. He was someone who did transition into writing for the pulps, but did so under a pseudonym. I interviewed his daughter, who was very young when he was writing. She did not. She had no idea. She was like, that was all off limits. That was in his office. That was off limits to us. And she didn't have any idea what names he was using. But it was just a good illustration of the problem with pseudonyms and biography and that sort of thing. It can be really difficult to track that down. So I sympathize with you, Mel.
This is like Troy being buried under naturally and then deliberately is what we're digging down through. So Lisa, could you remind us of your question?
So I actually want to change the question now. I mean, because although it can still be part of that,
No,
but like,
fair enough.
I'm just wondering if there are parts that people were surprised by. as well as, I mean, maybe there are points where you're like, ah, that was not what I was hoping it would be, but also parts that were surprising. Like I remember, I think that Malcolm Azania, Minister Faust, talked about this in the last one that, and if not, I remember he mentioned it to me, that he was so surprised when he was reading the story because he had thought that when he wrote War and Mir, he had invented some sort of cool new space technologies. And he's like, I can't believe this. He's like, Moore got to this stuff like almost 100 years before I did. And he found that delightful, you know, so sort of surprising and neat. And I don't know, I'm just wondering if anyone else had these moments of either resonance or real alienation from the story. The resonance one is the nicer, more positive one, obviously.
Well,
But
I
you know,
mean,
I mean,
I personally um, found it to be very much in line with early science fiction that I'm very familiar with. Little of it surprised me because most of what I have read from that era shares all of the same, we'd call them flaws today, but that was the nature of the fiction. Um, my personal theory is that a lot of the lack of characterization that it gets accused of is for space requirements, and they used stereotypical characters because that was the fast track to explaining what this character was all about. Mad scientist, you knew. That's all you needed to know, kind of a thing. Or mad scientist's daughter and the hero. These were all stock and they were very familiar, and you didn't have to waste any words on describing that. You could get right to the fantastical, gosh, wow, sense of wonder stuff. And a fair amount of Moore's story shares that we don't go into deep characterization, and the next thing we know, we're being introduced to not one but two different Martian civilizations, kind of a thing. So, does anybody else want to comment? Because we're now at the point where I ask everybody to tell us about their uh, current works prior to signing off.
I just wanted to piggyback on what you mentioned. The reader is fully immersed into a Black society, community of Black excellence, as opposed to today when we see a Black person usually portrayed on television. They're within a white community, you know, and there's one or two Black people. So I think it stands out in that it was fully Black. They went somewhere that was also fully Black. So um, I think that's just a notable part of the story.
It's one of the things I think that people who read this story for the first time now are going to be able to appreciate as one of the contributions this book is making is to be able to demonstrate that particular. Uh, you're not reading a space opera that is coming from the same kind of a background that you're normally familiar with, and here's a perfectly valid alternate way of approaching things. And there's also, you know, the historical aspect of this stuff that has been deliberately uh, covered up or ignored is a better word, I guess, on top of that. Since you're in front of me, why don't you, Cerise, why don't you tell us what you're currently working on right now and or places that we might find you or whatever. Sorry.
My website is kceres, KCERES.net. Has a listing of my books. I also have an author page on Amazon under K. Cerise Wright. Right now, I'm working on a time travel story about different nexuses in time where a particular country dominates that world. Like we have the timeline where the US is dominant, we have a timeline where China is dominant, we have a timeline where Russia is dominant. And people who are born in each of those timelines are allowed to travel between them, but no one else. So.
Thank you. Dedrin, we haven't heard much from you, so why don't we hear from you now?
Appreciate it. Thank you all so very much. So I'll drop on small studio banner there. So Subsume Studios, I'm I think in our cohort here working on issue 2 of you may see in the background, I have a lot of graphic novels and comics as an early medium. So I'm working on issue 2 of the Temporal 10th. So it's our HBCU's Doctor Who time travel story. So I'm in edits for a second for that. We got a new sci-fi book that I'm finally sharing with people called Soul Nebula. So that should be out early winter. And then looking at year 7 of Black Futures Month here in Atlanta, ideally to be a space and place with Auburn Avenue Research Library and good folks at Georgia Tech and talking about a lot of cool stuff. Obviously, this book. So thank y'all.
Great, thanks. Brooks?
Thanks, Steve. So, I mean, the most exciting thing for me, I think, right now is that in late September, Yale University Press published a collection of the letters of Claude McKay that I co-edited. So this major Harlem Renaissance figure who traveled the globe. He was not really a science fiction writer, but was the author of the first Black authored bestseller in the United States. And this covers his travels from, his initial arrival. He was born in Jamaica. His initial arrival in the United States, his travel to the early days of the Soviet Union, and then about 10 years in Europe. And it's just a fascinating, wild ride by this queer, leftist, Jamaican American writer. So excited to see that come out just a few weeks ago.
Nice. Ed? Ed, do you have
Happy to say that today I made progress on the review of this wonderful Sylvia Part novel that I'm reviewing for art papers. It's going to be my farewell piece of writing for the magazine, which is sunsetting this year. But yeah, if you have not read Luminous by Sylvia Park, I highly recommend it. I think it's a work of science fictional genius.
Okay. Killian?
Yeah, I'm continuing some of my research on George Schuyler and currently have another piece in the works and generally just, working on my PhD.
Okay. Didn't you do a presentation on the book a couple of months ago?
Yeah, I presented on it at it was the oh my goodness, can't believe I'm blanking on it. Yeah, but I've given a couple presentations kind of around the work of George Schuyler and the illustrated feature section, how it kind of interfaces with the rest of science fiction.
I'm curious as to how it was received.
People seem to really like it. I had someone reach out to me to contribute a chapter to a upcoming Black speculative fiction handbook. So definitely people seem to be liking this kind of new view into the history of Black speculative fiction.
Nice. Val?
Well, nothing so luminous as, I guess to accidentally use the book title there again, as Killian, which congratulations on all that stuff. That's super cool. Like I said, I graduated from tech recently. I've been kind of continuing working on my own, like hobbyist science fiction writing, and trying to grow in that regard. I actually did a competition entry this past month for like a vampire fiction thing. That was super fun. So yeah, in addition to all the paperwork and glorious things I've done in that regard, I'm just continuing to read and write science fiction, and still, as a hobby, work and research and continue to look into incredible history and all the facets of what make this genre incredible.
Thanks. Max?
I can get my mic working. Well, the big thing on my to-do is just always my grad school applications. With graduation, I think counting them down 24 days away, I got a lot of deadlines to meet. But the one thing I did forget to mention during our last call is as soon as it comes off of the back burner, after said grad school applications and graduation, I'm in the process of making a side scroller neo-noir video game for where the protagonist is gender fluid in order to sort of counteract the older tropes and problematic issues that came along with the genre.
Nice. Lisa? Microphone?
Yep. Oh, I got it this time. You'd think after having done this twice, at the end of the second one, I finally am, and I'm on track with the rest of you. Yeah. So, as I'd mentioned a little bit earlier, I am currently working on an edited anthology of early 20th century Afrofuturism for MIT Press. And that's going to include both a group of Harlem Renaissance authors and a lot of the authors from the Black Pulps as well. No Claude McKay. We looked high and low, but yeah, he did not do anything speculative. Lots of other great people, though. Fenton Johnson, Leslie Pinckney Hill. We were talking earlier about people coming back from World War I and, expecting rights. He has a marvelous poem called Armageddon. It's a great science fictional poem, exactly all about this. So really excited about that book. It's going to be called Mothership Rising, in part as an homage to Ed Hall's Mothership anthology. And also back all the way, obviously, to Phyllis Wheatley. So the Mothership will be taking off in early fall 2020, or 2026. So keep your eyes out for that.
Cool. Well, the big thing that I've got coming up is a convention we're calling SF100, April 24th to 26th of next year, Richmond, Virginia, to celebrate 100 years of amazing stories. And in addition to that, Amazing Selects continues to bring out book after book after book. So I'd appreciate it if people watching this would at least go and check it out at amazingstories.com. Thank you all very much for being here. I greatly appreciate
Steve?
it. Yes.
One last thing. Since John Jennings couldn't be here, I wanted to show his work for
please
Space
do.
Funk. If you can see it, it's kind of hard.
The facial recognition thing on with the background is making it difficult.
Okay. But
yeah,
he does great work.
John Jennings did great work, and he really jumped at the opportunity to do the cover for this book because it gave him a chance to pay homage to and play with some of the Harlem Renaissance art that has inspired and informed his own career. So it's a shame that he couldn't be here, but we probably will have another one of these sessions at some point in the future, and I hope to get him on for that. Well, again, thank you all very much, and have a great evening.
Good night, y'all.
Thanks,
everyone. Bye-bye.